Hello, welcome to another episode of Bunny Hugs Mental Health here on YouTube. I'm your host, Todd Rennebaum, suicide attempt survivor and in recovery of substance obsession. Hey, this is a really great episode. This one's about family secrets and just the damage it can do, and really just keeping secrets in general. Just how, well, there's that old saying, secrets keep us sick. Anyway, this is with Gail Lukasik, and she's discussing her mother. I'll let her talk all about it, but be sure to hit like and subscribe, make comments, follow my website. I don't know if you follow a website, but you can check out my website, www.bunnyhugspodcast.com. All my social media stuff's there, links, and stuff about my public speaking, stuff on my children's book I wrote, Sometimes Daddy Cries, all that kind of stuff. So go check that out. And without further ado, I give you Gail.
Well, this discovery started in 1995. I'm going pretty far back. I was between teaching jobs. So I teach on the college level. So I didn't have a job at that point, and I decided that I was going to do some research about my mother's father, my maternal grandfather, who has a very weird name, first name. It's Azima Frederick. He's from New Orleans. My mother's from New Orleans. So anytime I would ask my mom about her father, she would say something like, well, I really don't know much about him because my parents were divorced when I was 6 and I didn't grow up with him. So as a child, I accepted that. Also, there were no photographs of my grandfather, which I thought was odd. So I thought, you know what? I even asked my mother, when was he born? When did he die? I don't know. And so I thought that was strange. So I decided I was going to do my own research. And it's 1995, so there's no ancestry.com, right? In fact, there's
Right.
very little internet. So I had to do my research into the family tree the old-fashioned way, meaning I had to drive to the family history center that was closest to where I live. And so that's what I did. And I started going through census records because I figured that would help me. However, I didn't know when he was born or died, so I was there a long time, but I was looking at Louisiana. And finally, and it was on microfilm. So I'm going through all these, how tedious that can be. So anyhow,
Microfiche.
yes, microfiche. So anyway, 1900 Louisiana census, I see Frederick. That's the last name first. That's what I see first. And Frederick ends in a C, not a K. And I knew this had to be it because my mother said, if it ended in a K, that would make us German. And we're not German, we're French. So, okay. And then at the bottom of the line of Fredericks, I see Azima. Now, who else has got that name? It has to be my grandfather. So in 1900, I think he was 2 or 3 years old. So I'm looking at the names and I noticed something I was questioning. Beside each name was the letter B, and I didn't know what that meant. So I went to the head of the column, and it said that was the column for race. So I'm going, wait a minute, B, does that mean black? So I'm thinking, well, back then would they use B? So there was a woman that was helping us with our research, and I went up to her and I said, I just found my family, my grandfather, and for race, they have B. Does that mean black? And she goes, oh, yeah, those were all copied. That's what it means. And then, to my shock, she launches into all these racial slurs while I'm just standing there and using the N word repeatedly and referencing a certain type of candy that begins with N candy, which I've never heard of before. And I'm just standing there and she's sort of giggling and laughing as if I'm in on this joke. And then she ends up by saying, oh, you must be the person with all the slaves in your family. And I go, what is happening here? So I don't know what this woman's talking about. So I go back.
You're a legend there. Oh, you're the slave person.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I've never been there before. So, put everything away, I file it away, and I get out of there really quickly. It's January. I live in the Midwest, so it's cold. And I'm sitting in my car. I don't leave right away. I'm just sitting there and I'm looking at myself in the rearview mirror and I'm going, first of all, what just happened? And who the heck am I?
Hmm.
Am I still the white woman that entered that center? Am I not a white woman? I'm a white woman with black ancestors. Am I neither? I didn't know who I was. This was a real identity thing. So I left there and told my husband. And then I have a very good friend who used to write for the Chicago Tribune, and I told her about it. And she says, you know what? Those census records, they're not always accurate. What you need to do is write to the state of Louisiana as if you are your mother and say that you lost your birth certificate.
Hmm.
So my mom's still alive. She lives in Ohio. I live in Illinois. So I thought, that's pretty sneaky, but I like it. So I do. I write as if my mother's first name was Elvira. So I write as if I'm Elvira and I write to the state of Louisiana. I say, oh, I lost my birth certificate. So they send me the birth certificate. And I think, oh, this will clear everything up. I'll know what's going on here. So I open it up and in parentheses it's my mom's birth certificate, are three letters, COL. I go, COL, does that mean colored? My mom was born in 1921. So that's how they would refer to someone of Black ancestry would be colored. So I think, okay, this is, so I didn't expect that. So and I'm a researcher, so I thought I'm going to write one more letter to the state of Louisiana and ask them what they mean by COL. What does that mean? So they write me back. They send me this very official looking letter, big stamp of the state of Louisiana on it. And they do give me an explanation. COL refers to people of color, mostly of Black ancestry. And if you have any doubt about that, you can request that we change it, but that's what it means. So I
Hmm.
had my answer. I had my answer.
And your mother's obviously white.
She looks white. So,
Or yeah, right, right. Yeah, that's, I mean, yeah.
so my next step, of course, would be to call my mother to talk to my mom because, um, when I first found the census records, I thought, well, maybe she doesn't know about this, maybe they made a mistake. But then when I saw the birth certificate, I thought she has to know. It's her birth
Hmm.
certificate.
Hmm.
So I thought, well, this is not a conversation I'm going to have on the phone. My mom was a very kind of wily person. She knew how to get out of things. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to wait till we have a visit. Either I'm going to go there or she's going to come here. Unfortunately, right at that time, my father became very, very ill. He had cancer, and it was a very protracted illness. So I thought this is not the time to be dealing with that. So I waited. He died 2 years later in 1997. And so that's when I was able to finally talk to my mom about this. And I invited her for a visit to my house here in Illinois. And I waited till my husband went off to work because I felt like this is going to be just a conversation between us. So sat her down and I said, Mom, I'm a little confused about something. I said, I have your birth certificate from the state of Louisiana, and on it it says you're colored. And she got really upset with me. I mean, it's like, I don't know what birth certificate you have. And that's the tone. But mine says I'm white. She says, oh, so I didn't know, I could have let it go, but that's not me. So I said, well, Mom, I don't know. I also look at this. I have other documentation. I was going to bring her the letter and all that stuff. And I said, I'm willing to get it and show it to you. So she gets very quiet and she just sits there. I thought, oh. And then she looks at me and she said, you can never tell anyone until after I die. How will I hold my head up with my friends if they know?
Wow.
Yeah, I was shocked. really, and I said, Mom, it's a good thing. It's okay. I mean, it's fine. I'm trying to, reassure her it's okay. And she said, No, you have to promise me you will tell no one until
Mm.
after I die. So I thought she was really upset. I thought, I don't understand where she's coming from because she raised me and my brother to be very accepting of all people, didn't matter race, ethnicity, didn't matter. She taught us that. Yet she was telling me this, that I couldn't reveal her secret. So I agreed. I said, okay, it's your secret to keep. I won't tell anyone. Well, my mom lived a long life. She lived 17 more years, and I kept her secret for 17 years. I did. My husband knew, my children knew, and my good friend knew, and that was it. I
Mm.
didn't tell anyone. I didn't even tell my brother because I asked her if I could tell my brother, and she said, You cannot tell him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So he just recently found out, like maybe 10 years ago or so.
Yes, that's a whole other story that we can get into, which in my new book I do talk about. But suffice it to say, that was a hard secret to keep for 17 years.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
What does a secret like that do to you?
Well, I was really confused. First of all, it definitely messes with your identity. You just, I mean, you're looking at me, you can see what I look like.
Hmm.
Everyone who I've ever met has never asked me what my race or ethnic. They might ask my ethnicity, but they've never asked my race. I'm so white looking. So, but then now I know that that's not the whole story, and that my mother was passing as white. So my father's already deceased, so he more than likely didn't know either.
Mm.
And so it messes with your identity. But as time goes on, as you know, you're busy with your life. I'm teaching, I have children. It kind of gets shoved in the corner. It's not prominent in my life. But once Ancestry came out, I did do some research. It was still there, it was still in the back of my mind. Who are my people? We all want to know our people, our tribe.
Hmm.
Who do we come from? So, I did find, which I was thrilled, an ancestor. I'm trying to remember what would be my great grandfather, either great or great grandfather, who actually served during the Civil War. He was a private in the Native Guards, which were in Louisiana, in the New Orleans area, and they fought for the Union. They were people, men of color, most of them free men of color, who defended our Union. So I was really proud of this guy. And I thought, I'm going to tell my mom about him. His name's Leon Frederick. So I called her up and I said, I found out something pretty amazing, and I started to tell her about him. You know what she said to me?
No.
So how are the kids?
Sheesh. That must have been, I mean, being the granddaughter, I, it messes with your identity. I couldn't imagine what it did to her and how diligent she must have been at just shutting that stuff out of her mind.
Yes. Um, in the book I wrote, the memoir, White Like Her, My Family Story of Race and Racial Passing, I have a whole chapter I devote to passing. Um, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Canada, but here, that's especially during Jim Crow South times, that was a big deal. And a lot of people from the South and maybe the North too, who could pass, some of them did. I mean, it opened doors for more opportunities. Up until 1976 in this country, you could not marry a person of a different race. It was illegal. So my parents, I don't
That was a
know.
federal law?
Yes, it was changed. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not right. It was in the South, the southern states.
Oh, I see.
It was made into, it became okay to marry someone of a different race in 1976. I think it was Loving versus Loving case, very famous here case.
Hmm.
But my mother, to marry my father, would have to come to a northern state.
I see.
I have no evidence of this, but I suspect she found a way to get a white birth certificate. I have
Hmm.
no evidence, but because she wouldn't talk to me. So, yeah, it really does mess with you, that kind of. And I think for my mom, she had all these, I talk about this in the book too, really quirky habits that as a kid I never understood. Um, she would never go into the sun unless she was wearing a hat and gloves. She avoided the sun. That was a big deal for her. She always had her makeup was always pristine. She she used to
Wow.
she used to wear to bed at night a light foundation on her face. And one time, as I got to be a teenager and I started, thinking about makeup and what am I going to wear? And I said to her once, Mom, why are you wearing makeup to bed? And here's what she said. She says, Gail, you never know in the middle of the night if there'd be an emergency and they'd have to take you to the hospital and you want to look your best.
Hmm. It's like always wear clean underwear.
Exactly. Only she was more worried about her face.
Like I don't care about my underwear. I just want to make sure people know I'm white.
Exactly.
Oh
So
boy, that
that she just had these quirky things that I couldn't understand. And once I found the truth out,
that'd be
I,
exhausting.
yeah, I think there was a point though, she had passed for so long that she had forgot about it in some ways. You know what I mean? She was white. She was
Yeah.
accepted as white. When the book came out back in 2017, I was invited to come back to the town where I grew up and give a talk. And I had some cousins show up, some distant cousins. And afterwards, they came up to me and they said, We had no idea your mother was passing. These are cousins from my father's side.
Hmm. Hmm.
We're so surprised.
Hmm. Oh, yeah, well, I can imagine. If you were surprised, I'm sure they were too.
They were like, What?
Oh, we all knew except you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Didn't you get that?
So this is, I mean, I hear of people being adopted and the identity crisis they have when they find out as an adult that they were adopted. So I imagine it's somewhat similar, except there was so much shame wrapped around this,
Yeah, there was.
where whereas maybe not always with the adoption.
Yeah, shame. And if you consider the time period, like I
Hmm.
said, my mom was born in 1921 in the South, so you have Jim Crow South. Um, and I've heard a story once from a woman who came to one of my library talks about her ancestor who was passing. And you could be shot. You get
Hmm.
discovered. You could have been lynched. You could have been shot. It was a life or death kind of thing back then.
For your
Um,
mother, even.
oh, if not probably up north, I don't know, but in the
Right.
South, if she had been passing, it could have been. I
Hmm.
mean, during her time period growing up, you could only sit certain places on the bus. You could only eat at certain lunch counters. You could only drink from a certain water fountain.
Hmm. Do you ever find out um kind of the story about your grandmother and how that relationship was with the black gentleman or
Well, here's the interesting thing. Now, my grandmother was very fair. She was probably around as white as me. However, I think it's the 1930 census. She's listed as mulatto. So, yeah,
which is colored?
yes. Well, not it can be a blend, like mixed race, the way today we
Oh.
would say mixed race. So she was marked as mulatto. And the US government, I think it was 1930, it was right around 1930, decided they were going to get rid of that designation. There's all kinds of is it that way in Canada? Are there all kinds of racial designations for people?
I, I try not to fill out paperwork, so I don't know.
That's smart.
Probably there's, well, I know, well, especially with like indigenous people in
Yeah.
the Canada, I know there's options and things, and I don't know how they figure it out or how they label it or divide it, but yeah, there's definitely, yeah, that stuff.
So what happened is in 1930, the government said, no, no, we're not going to do mulatto anymore. You're either black or white. So
Oh.
in the South, if what they decided to do, because they were getting nervous about these people who are trying to pass,
Hmm.
uh, they had the one drop rule. And that meant that if you had only one drop of African blood, that made you black.
Wow.
Yeah. So I suspect in my grandmother's case, she did have black ancestry, and that's why she was designated mulatto and then Negro. So yeah, it was pretty
Oh.
strict. I don't know if you have history buffs that listen to the podcast, but I found this interesting. Louisiana decides in 1970 that, oh gosh, that one drop rule is really strict. We're going to do a mathematical formula to decide whether you're black. So they
Oh.
come up with if you're 1/32 black, you're black.
Wow.
Yeah. This is how
So,
nervous they were. Uh, yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And also, they wanted to keep minorities down. They didn't want to give them opportunities. This was another way of controlling minorities in the US.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing through your mother's eyes, she was doing you and the rest of the generations below her a favor by passing us white. It's like this is you know, I'm trying to make a better future for you because I know what happens if you're considered black.
Yeah. Absolutely 100%. I think that's
Yikes.
how she thought. Absolutely. And I always joke about when I give talks, she found the whitest man in Ohio she could find. It was during World War II my parents met. So my dad was stationed down in the South and then was shipped off to the Southern, um, the, uh, the South Pacific Theater. That's where he
Hmm.
served. But that's where they met because he was in Mississippi and the GIs would drive into New Orleans over a weekend and have R&R. So that's where they met. So
Hmm.
yeah. So she found a
Wow.
white guy.
Well, good for her, I guess. I don't know. I
Well,
don't know.
yes, I feel bad
As
for
long as
my
she's
mom.
happy.
Well, I feel bad for her when I really think about it, is that she could never be her true self. She
Yeah,
could never be
absolutely.
who she really was. She had to hide it. The only relatives that of hers that could visit us were what we call passable. In other words, they could pass for white, being like my grandmother. She came to visit, and my mother's sister came to visit. She was passable, though she did marry a mixed race man. So, how sad. That's very
Oh,
sad to me.
so was her sister also mixed or
Yeah. Yeah. But
oh,
that's Aunt Shirley. Aunt Shirley married we called him Uncle Red. He was a mixed race man as well. He was a colonel in the Air Force, so they traveled all over. But their children were not passable. They didn't look passable.
hmm.
So that was always an issue when you were passing. What are the kids going to look like?
So did they know that they were mixed then? So you, or were those the cousins that came up to you? Oh no, that was your father's side.
Yeah, my father's side is all white, so 100%, you know.
Okay,
So
so
and I didn't really know Aunt Shirley's children. I think I met them once or twice. I mean, they looked mixed, but and I'm sure to my father, he probably was thinking, well, that's from Uncle Red's side. Do you
oh,
know?
so Uncle Red didn't hide.
No,
Oh,
because
I see. Or,
he was out in the open.
hmm. I actually have mixed race cousins. I have an aunt that has two kids that are
Oh,
they could not pass. I mean, they obviously look mixed, I guess, but or even, I mean, they could pass for black even, I probably, or
Yeah,
I don't know. I know that there's like even within the black community, they could be discriminatory against lighter blacks and
yeah,
things, and it's all very complex and
it is.
weird. Um, but I grew up in a very small town in Saskatchewan, Canada, and I remember my cousins coming to visit. Um, when we were little, we go to the park, we go to the pool, and I mean, it was like almost like cars screeching to a halt.
Oh,
You're like, what is
oh,
what is
wow,
that, and why are they in our town? It was just
wow.
like it was the most exotic thing anyone's ever seen, other than if you went and watched a football game at the local city. I mean,
Yeah, yeah. So
and
was
yeah.
there prejudice against them? Were they treated okay or
I think they were always treated okay when they came and visited, but it was also one of those things where it was like after like 10 years old, they didn't really, we would go to the city to visit them. They didn't come
yeah,
out here. And I don't know if that was a conscious decision or it was just
yeah,
what it was. But yeah, I know there was candies with the N word in it when I was a kid.
there you go.
Um, yeah. And even eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger by the toe. We were
Yeah,
like
yeah,
told when we were little, like, it's tiger. If anyone says anything
yeah.
different, you
Oh, for
know,
sure. Yeah.
yeah. Which is, I mean, it's not that long ago that this stuff was, said. I mean, and okay, so it's a long story. So my cousin's the one father, he got deported back to the States.
Oh,
So my aunt and my uncle, um, or I guess he was never really my uncle technically, but um, they had to split up because he went back to the States
yeah.
and was over some very minor thing. So even Canada was like, no, get out of here.
Oh,
Um, and they've kind of reconnected a little bit in later life. And she went and visited him, and this is what my mom told me that walking around, I think it was in Atlanta, somewhere in Georgia. I mean, there were still people saying the N word to them as they're walking down the street together,
yeah.
which is bananas.
Yeah. It's not good. It's not good.
Yeah, that's that's bizarre to me. I mean,
Yeah.
so I guess I get why your mom would do that.
Mhm.
It just breaks my heart. Like you said, like it's so sad that she couldn't just be herself and
Yeah.
now, yeah. Have you
And
ever met any of the, sorry, go ahead. I'll ask the
I was
question
going
once
to
you're,
say, I've been asked, well, when you found out, were you angry with her?
hmm
And I was never angry with my mother. I understood totally what she did and why she did it. The only thing I feel is tremendous sadness that once she knew I knew and she knew I was keeping her secret, why couldn't she talk to me about it? That we could have had such a closer, much closer relationship. She could have told me what she went through, how hard it was for her to do this, what she was thinking. Um, but on the other hand, I tell myself, well, had she done that, you never would have been on Genealogy Roadshow and you never would have written a book. So,
right.
so it's just the way it turned out.
But, yeah, maybe it was just too painful for her to talk about.
I think so.
Mhm. Have you met any of your black branch of the family?
Yes. Okay, here's the other amazing part of this story. Are you familiar with PBS's Genealogy Roadshow, which used to be on? It was on for a few years, I think 4 or 5 years. Anyway,
Yeah,
we
I'm
were.
familiar.
Oh, okay. So anyhow, in it's not Finding Your Roots because Finding Your Roots is the famous people.
Right, right.
Genealogy Roadshow were ordinary people like me. So, my mother died in 2014, and I still didn't have any firm answers. I thought I knew what this was about, but I didn't know for sure. So our local library ran an ad in their newsletter saying that Genealogy Roadshow is looking for family mystery stories, and one of the cities was New Orleans. I didn't see the ad. My husband did. So he comes to me and he says, you should apply for this. You need to find this out. So I did. And they had me on the show. So
Hmm.
that was the first door that opened for me. The show aired in, I think, January 2015, but we filmed in August of 2014. And it verified everything I thought I knew. My mother had been passing. They had everything there. Then when the show aired, oh, here's the part I didn't know for sure. My grandfather, after my grandmother and he divorced, married another woman and had a second family. Now, I kind of knew a little bit, but the show told me that he had five other children, and I didn't know that.
Hmm.
And I have to tell you, that hit me hard when they were telling me this because I felt so bad for my mom. She felt abandoned by her father. And she had a
Right.
very chaotic childhood from shuffling from one relative to another relative, whatever. Anyhow, so like I said, the show aired in January 2015, aired on a Tuesday. I get up that Friday and I'm opening my email and I see there's an email from a woman by the name of Stephanie Frederick, and my heart stops. And I say, I don't know any Stephanie Frederick. So I start reading the email, and she said, Hi, I'm Stephanie. I saw the show. I wanted to tell you that my father is your uncle, and I'm your cousin, and I want to welcome you to our family.
Hmm.
I sat there and I cried. Tears,
So,
all my aunts and uncles were gone. My parents were gone. I hardly ever saw my cousins. Now I have an uncle by the name of Azima, by the way, and same name, and Stephanie. So an hour later, I get another email from a woman who says she's Alma, and she's my aunt.
hmm.
And she says, I want to welcome you to the family. When can we all talk? So that day, we had a conference call, Stephanie and Alma and me, and we talked for I don't know how many hours. They didn't know I
Wow.
existed. I didn't know they existed. And then the
Wow.
upshot was, we want to have a party in New Orleans. When do you come in New Orleans? Well, I already had a trip planned for April because I was going to research the book. And I said, April. And they go, we'll be there. So we had this amazing family reunion. Fredericks from across the country came to New Orleans. Some of them hadn't seen each other in 30 years. This became the family united. And I have another aunt, Aunt Brenda, who, by the way, recently passed. But I sat at a table with my new uncle, my two aunts, and I just kept staring at them because they looked so much like my mother, and it was like my mother was there with me. It
Hmm.
was amazing. I can't tell
Hmm.
you what that did for me. It was truly amazing.
Wow. Wow. So when your grandfather remarried, he remarried a black woman?
Mixed raced again,
Oh, I see. Okay.
mixed raced again. Um, yeah,
Hmm.
he died, he died in 46, so he didn't live a whole lot long, but they did have the five kids. So
Right.
because my uncle, we call him Uncle Fred, the one I was telling you about, he went to the hospital when his father died. He was 7, so you could see how young they were.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, so I had this, this new family that I didn't know about.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, well, maybe not, but did you then learn the roots way like back to Africa or?
Well, here's the interesting thing. They were coming to me for information.
Oh no.
They didn't, they didn't, they saw the show. And here's the great thing about that show. I wish it was still on. You don't get paid. No one gets paid. They don't even pay for you to get to the place where they film.
Hmm.
But they gave me 10 pages of the genealogist notes, which took the family back to 1792. And they gave me, this is even better, all the original documents they found related to the Frederick family. It were pages and pages. So as a researcher and a person who's going to write this book, wow, 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 wow.
Yeah.
So when I sat down to write it, I thought to myself, okay, 1792, Ursine Frederick in New Orleans, that's great. Guess what? That's not good enough. That's not good enough for me. I'm going to get this family as far back in Louisiana as I can get it. And I did, with the help of a genealogist that I hired, who actually is a researcher for Finding Your Roots. Her name's Judy Riffle. She lives in Baton
Hmm.
Rouge. So anyhow, she helped me. I was able to trace the family back to the early to mid 1700s in Louisiana. I found an enslaved woman by the name of Marta. And there was also an enslaved Native American woman, nameless. Um, but I had two enslaved ancestors that I know for sure. I'm sure I have more. But I tell Marta's story in the book because her story is fascinating. It's just fascinating. She was enslaved. Her enslaver, she had four children, and then he freed her and the four children, you know, freed her. And then she went on to have a total of 13 children with him. The unusual part is now she's a free woman of color in Louisiana. In his will, and this is very unusual, he was very well-to-do. He left half his estate to her and the other half to his 13 children, which in essence raised them into the middle class,
Hmm.
from slavery to the middle class.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ah. So so they were mixed even
Yes, because he
200 years
was
ago.
100% white. Yeah, he was 100% white.
Hmm.
So that's
See,
how far back.
I don't know if you've heard a Métis in Canada. There's a race, I guess, called
Okay.
Métis, and they are half indigenous, half white. And it was like when the fur traders came over, they would m marry, quote unquote, marry, sometimes I'm assuming by force, native women, and that basically they had their own culture and their own kind of language. They spoke French, but they looked kind of native, and
Yeah,
so it almost seems like there could be some, like that's a whole other almost race in the States.
absolutely. That sounds a lot like what they call Creole in New
Oh,
Orleans area. And,
okay.
my mother's family, she didn't speak French, but I think her grandmother spoke French. So she was right about French. She just didn't give me the whole picture. Didn't tell me the whole story.
Well, I heard they came from Canada. That whole, no, that's
The
Cajun.
Cajuns came from,
Cajun. Right, right, right.
yes, right.
hmm Um, you were using the word mulatto earlier. Is that a derogatory term now? Am I wrong about that?
It's not used anymore.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
it's not, it would have been derogatory. And I think the derivation is mule. If I'm, People can check me on that. If I'm wrong, I'm sure someone will tell you.
right.
I'm always getting told when I'm wrong. You got that wrong.
Oh, that's fascinating. So now do you feel less like you know your identity now? Like you're not kind of just like who the hell I thought I knew who I was, then it went to who the hell am I to
Yeah.
oh, now I'm this whole other person.
Well, it's a great question, really. It took me, I don't want to see. So I found out what? Once the book came out, I was still uncertain of who I was. People were, every time I would give a talk, they go, "So what are you? So what, or how do you identify?" It would either be rude, "What
Right.
are you?" or "How do you identify?" And for the first few years, I would say I'm a white woman with Black ancestry. And in my new book, I talk about this. And then this was early on after the book came out, I got really skewered this was after I was on the Megyn Kelly show and I talked about it on Amazon by a Black woman, really took me to task. And she hadn't read the book, but she said, Black people should not read this book. Do not read this book. And she was very upset with me because she thought I didn't honor my Black ancestry. Now, she hasn't read the book, and I do honor it, but I kind of knew where she was coming from. But I have to tell you, there's always someone upset with me, however I identify.
Right.
I mean, I gave a talk in St. Louis early on, and a black woman said to me, "So how do you identify?" And I gave that answer, white woman with black. And she looked at me and she said, "Well, I'm the president of the Black Caucus in St. Louis, and that is the only answer you can give, because any other answer would have been wrong." And I thought, okay, race is touchy. So I realized early as I went through this process of identifying, I'm always upsetting someone. And,
Yeah.
and it has more to do with them than it really has to do with me.
Right. Right.
So then
Right.
I'm going along years, first few years of books out. I end up on this podcast, My American Melting Pot, to talk about the one drop rule and my racial identity. And there was another woman who, like me, very white looking, who had a black grandfather. Um, so we got to talking about that. And the host said to me, as I was telling my story, she says, in a way, you're kind of like an ambassador, how did she put it, of blackness for white people, an ambassador to explain blackness to white people.
Hmm.
I thought, well, I didn't choose that role. And if that's what's happening, I didn't think about that. After the show, I thought a lot about it. I thought, in a way, she's right. Because the majority of my talks, when I'm in person, it's usually a white audience. Now, sometimes it's mixed. It just depends where I'm at. And I thought, am I doing a disservice to my Black ancestry? I have enslaved women. Look at my mother, what she went through in Jim Crow South. Look at my ancestors, what happened to them. So I thought long and hard about it. And there's a little perverse side of me too that I like.
Oh.
Yes. And I thought, I'm not going to identify that way anymore. I have
Hmm.
and even if you do my DNA, I have 7 to 9% African.
79.
7 to 9. Depends
Oh,
where,
okay.
not 79. You
Sorry.
wouldn't be this way. Anyway, so I thought I'm no longer going to identify as a white woman with black ancestry. I'm going to say I'm a mixed race woman. Let them figure it out. And so I love getting up in front of an audience, looking so white and saying, I consider myself mixed race, and here's the reasons why.
Hmm.
And I think it's makes people think, at least I
Hmm.
hope, that they start thinking about race a little bit differently, that we kind of see it because it really is a social construct. Though we don't live that way, we really don't live that way. There's so much racism and bigotry, in my country, in the US. We don't live that way, but it is a social construct. So anyhow, that's how I'm identified. I wrote an article for the Washington Post about this right around the time that we did our census in the country, because it was the first time I was able to identify as a mixed race person,
Hmm.
and I did.
Do you no one argues with that identity anymore, or do you still
No
get?
one has said anything much. COVID came in, so I didn't do a lot of in person,
Ah,
and you know, but I probably will be
yeah,
doing more, and I will identify that way, and I'm open to a discussion.
yeah,
I'm open.
yeah.
Usually my talks at the end, we have really good discussions about race. And that's
Right,
the purpose of this. That's part of the reason I wrote the book.
right.
All these designations, what do they really mean?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I know that I've talked to some Métis folks in Saskatchewan here. And some people are technically Métis because they're half white, half indigenous, but they didn't grow up in the Métis culture, so that's a whole other complex thing.
It is.
Um, and they quite kind of like what you're saying, white people didn't really accept them as fully white. Native people didn't fully
Yes.
accept them as fully, indigenous. And then, yeah, you're kind of like this lost puppy
Yeah.
that you're kind of in between things. And so, I can only imagine how your parents felt, especially 100 years ago,
Yeah.
being mixed race. I,
Yeah. Once the book came out and I did all these appearances, I was getting a lot of emails from people who are mixed and saying the exact same thing you're saying. Some would say, the whites don't accept me, the blacks. I'm The whites don't accept me, the blacks don't accept me. I'm in this limbo place.
I think
Um,
my cousins get that a lot, actually.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that's true. I think that's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're interested in identity. I mean, how do you do identity? How do you, part of your identity is your tribe and your culture. Am I right? I mean, I'm going to defer to you on that. That's my
Yeah.
impression. In my new book, What They Never Told Us, True Stories of Family Secrets and Hidden Identities Revealed, I talk to people who have these family secrets. All their stories are in there. I have a whole section on adoption. I have a whole
Mm.
section on donor conceived people. I have a whole section on race and ethnicity. And they talk about trying to find their tribe. If you find out, I'm jumping topics here, but if
No,
you
it's good.
find out that either your mom or your dad or both are not really your blood parents, it doesn't mean you don't love them anymore. It just, all these people want then to find, so who are my blood parents? And what does that mean to my identity? And some of
Right.
them um, had a black ancestry, and they were, when they would go out in the real world would say, "You're not what you're saying you are." And then they would go home and their parents would say, "No, no, no, you're white. You're white. You're our son or daughter." So that's crazy making.
Right. Yeah. 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 Um, okay, I have so much I want to say now, but
We could talk
uh,
for hours, Todd. It could go
yeah.
on and on and on.
Well, just quickly, I wanted to make the point that with mental illness too, there's that family secret where it's like, I have an aunt that I didn't even know I had an aunt, and she was like, they put her in a psych
Yes,
ward for
yes.
50 years or something, or say with a parent or whatever. Um, so there's shame kind of all
Same.
around that too. But
Yeah.
I wanted to mention in Canada here, so a lot of most of my listeners actually are American, but um, a lot of Americans don't understand just the racism in Canada. So when white people came and kind of took over the country, late 1800s all the way to the late 1900s, we had things called residential schools, and the
Oh,
government would come, take native children, put them in these boarding house schools, and be like, you're not allowed to speak your language. You're not allowed to basically just assassinate their culture completely. And and then in the 60s as well, there was also something called the 60s scoop, where the government would take your children and then white families would adopt them and to quote unquote assimilate them. And now there's like this whole intergenerational trauma thing that's happening with the indigenous community because for so long they didn't have an identity, and there's so many people dealing with that trauma of who the hell am I, and who are like, okay, yes, I'm indigenous, but where are my roots exactly? And and yeah, that, and now Canada's dealing with this incredible intergenerational trauma of like almost an entire race of people. And
yes.
yeah, and people that don't get it are frustrated and like, oh, can't they just get over it? And
Well,
it's like,
yeah, I hear that a lot. Well, you know about what we did to our Native Americans. So same story. And actually, I wish I could remember the name of it. You might remember. There was an excellent movie. I thought I w watched it last year about a woman. She was a lawyer raised in a Jewish family, and her whole indigenous identity, and she was Canadian. I think she
mhm,
was. Oh, wait, I might got that. I might have that wrong. She's not American, though. It's not an American story. It's totally, it was a race, and then she goes in search of her family, and she was just like you're saying, was taken for no reason.
yeah,
But I mean, she had a great life. She was a lawyer. She was smart, but she wanted her people. She wanted to know her people. It was
yeah,
such a heartbreaking story.
yeah. That just goes to show just how important knowing who you are is. I mean, you could
Yeah,
be the son of a billionaire, and if you don't know who you are, that will that's trauma. That'll
it's
stick with
trauma.
you forever.
Yeah.
Hmm. And then do you know Buffy St. Marie, that whole thing?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Yeah, then you hear stories like that. It's, yeah, race and people, and it's just, so complex and
Oh,
complicated. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that, well, when you identify as something and someone else doesn't agree with it, that's really their problem.
Yeah. Took
Um,
me a while to get to that place.
as long as you're being truthful of like,
Yeah.
you're
No,
not Buffy St. Marie.
I'm totally being truthful and
Yeah, I know, I know.
yeah, and everything. I mean, you look at, well, so what makes up a person's identity? You look at your ancestry, you look at you can look at your DNA if it's important to you. I mean, your culture, all of that is what makes you who you are. So yeah, but
Mhm.
you're so right about the shame because that comes through in this new book. The shame, that's why all these secrets are kept. It's shame, usually shame. There's some kind of
Mhm.
element of shame in it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, do you think things have gotten better, or is there just different things people are ashamed of now?
Yeah, I think it's different things, maybe. I mean, I told you about adoption and that there was a lot of shame because there was this baby scoop era in the 60s, and I talk about that in the book.
Hmm.
Because of sexual mores were starting to change in here in this country, and women were unwed mothers, were having sex and having babies, and their parents were horrified, and that got to get rid of that kid, get adopted, and there was no abortion. So, all these children were adopted and all had to do with shame. And these young women were told things like, this is something we're just going to get over and forget about and never talk again about it.
Hmm.
But you've made a human being who's out there in the world somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I just thought of another family secret.
Whoa.
So my mom's mom uh was raised by her grandparents. Okay, this is gonna get complicated. My grandmother's actual mother was a young single woman in Scotland. So she had the baby, and then the family kicked the mother off to Australia.
Oh, wow.
And so then it was almost like my grandmother replaced her. So I have a whole other chunk of family over in Australia that was out of shame again. It was like my daughter is,
Yes.
promiscuous at
Yeah.
17 or whatever. Yeah, so yeah, it's
Have you
yeah.
met them or do you know them or
No, no.
no?
I think one of my aunts talked to one of them at one point, like once Facebook and the internet kind of started coming around, but I know nothing about them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is fascinating how shame has basically developed the world in some ways.
Yeah.
What would you say today in 2024 is maybe the thing that people have shame about and is a family secret that
I
there's st
still think race comes into that.
yeah,
I don't think we have progressed very far with that. So I think that would be something that would be kept hidden.
maybe like say if a woman isn't pregnant by her biological father or brother or something like that.
Incest?
Incest, thank you.
Yes.
I don't know why I couldn't think.
Ah,
I,
wow.
s- I suppose that would be something people still
Yeah.
kept
Well,
under their
you
hat.
know what's going on in the US that, it's a state by state thing now with abortion. So it
Right.
depends on in a case of incest, when we had a federal law, you could have an abortion, depending on how you think about these things. That's an individual choice for everyone. But, that's not the case anymore since the Supreme Court overturned Roe. So some women have to travel, and yeah, that's the
Mm.
hard reality.
Can you maybe promote your new book that's coming out? Because this will be coming out just before or around the time that it's released and where
Yeah,
people
it'll
can
be
find it.
out. Thanks for asking. It'll be out at the end of November. You can get it Amazon, Barnes and Noble, any of those places. It has a big long title, so don't be intimidated. Yeah, the main title is What They Never Told Us: True Stories of Family Secrets and Hidden Identities Revealed. So, you could just, Google my name and White Like Her will come up and all these. I started out, well, I actually started out as a poet, but then I started writing mystery novels. So I do write mysteries as well. So,
Mm.
but yeah, this new book it's really, stories are incredible. And I'm going to just give you a little teaser. One of the men I talked to, didn't find out he was adopted till he was in his 40s. So he's from Plano, Texas, and he's a Texas cop, big guy, big Texas cop, real nice guy. So he finds out, because DNA does the DNA thing, goes up on Ancestry, and suddenly some woman is contacting him and his wife through Messenger saying, I think you might be my nephew. So he kind of dismisses it. And he says, will you take over and see, Anyway, a long story short, he ends up having to know. So here he is, this Texas cop, finds out, yes, this woman is his aunt, his maternal aunt, and his biological father is still alive. He's a murderer serving a life sentence in Louisiana.
Wow, man, this
I'm not
damn
going to tell you
ancestry.
much more because it's a really amazing story of redemption and atonement. It is incredible.
Wow,
It's just an incredibly beautiful story.
this damn ancestry. It's just spilling all the family beans.
It's that darn DNA. Well, there's a saying, DNA doesn't lie. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true. Wow. Yeah, you can't keep a secret anymore.
No, no more secrets.
I don't want my kids to know I'm actually their father. I mean, they're just in the other room, but
Uh,
I don't know what I'm talking about. Be sure to subscribe and to like this video. You can listen on Apple Podcast and Spotify. This is Todd Rennebaum saying, make your beds and take your meds. Keep watching for more interviews with incredible people telling their stories of resilience and adversity with mental health and mental illness.